Good afternoon, Keith Tebow, FRC Media. Thank you for joining us on this Monday. As you know, FRC Media is in the midst of speaking to all 11 candidates that are running for the 4th Congressional District, a candidate looking to succeed Joseph Kennedy as he tries to run for the U.S. Senate against Ed Markey. We continue our interviews today. I'm pleased to be joined right now by one of the Democratic candidates running in the race, Jesse Mermell. Jesse, welcome. Thank you, and welcome to Fall River. How are you?
Thank you. You know, the drive was so much shorter today. I just had to walk to my computer.
I know. We spoke before. We did meet. We met back in January. You were at Bristol Community College for the college's Martin Luther King community breakfast, and we did have an opportunity to speak back then. But it's good to speak to you again now, a little more in depth and a little more in person as we get closer to the primary on September 1st. Let me start, Jesse, by asking you, for people who don't know who you are, give us a little background about yourself and why you decided to run for Congress.
Sure, I'm happy to. I've been working in Massachusetts politics for over 20 years, always fighting for access to healthcare that works for everyone, access to economic opportunity. I ran external affairs at Planned Parenthood. I was Deval Patrick's communications director. I spent 6 years on the select board in Brookline. And for the past 5 years, I've been the president of the Alliance for Business Leadership, the socially responsible progressive business group in Massachusetts, really fighting to create economic opportunity for everyone by equitably investing in transportation, raising the minimum wage, fighting for paid family and medical leave, and earned sick time. And I'm running for Congress because those core democratic values that I've been fighting for my entire life are under attack by Donald Trump and his minions. And quite frankly, this president and everyone willing to do his bidding are taking us back as a country and taking us away from the just future that everyone in the 4th Congressional District deserves. And there was no way, given the work that I have done, given the commitment of over 20 years that I have put into fighting for that just future for everyone in this district and in the entire state, that I couldn't roll up my sleeves and jump in this race and fight to make that happen for everyone when I'm in Congress. And I think that my track record is why I've earned the support of groups like the Coalition for Social Justice in Fall River, like Ayanna Pressley, the Congresswoman, like SEIU, the entire state council, like the State Council of Machinists. We've got real momentum on our side, an incredible coalition coming together. And I think it's rooted in the work that I've done in partnership with so many people, including so many incredible activists in Fall River over the past 20 years.
Let me ask you, as you're out and about, there's so many, issues in this campaign, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time we have together. But is there one issue that really you're really passionate about and you're ready to work on day one when you get to Washington?
Oh my goodness, you're right. It is really tough to narrow it down, both because there's so many things I care about and because frankly, there's so much we need to work on. But for me, it's about the way in which our failing healthcare system is leaving people behind, right? We can't have economic opportunity if people don't feel healthy and safe. We can't have racial justice if people don't feel healthy and safe. We can't have reproductive justice, environmental justice. It all comes down to keeping people healthy. And from my time running external affairs at Planned Parenthood to seeing just how central reproductive health care is for people, to the time that I spent running the Massachusetts Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired and working directly with blind and visually impaired elders to keep them safe, independent, and healthy in their own homes. I have seen the full spectrum of the ways in which our failing healthcare system is making it so hard for people to get ahead in this country, so hard for people to get ahead in the 4th Congressional District. Even an issue like paid family and medical leave that I have been so involved in here in Massachusetts is a healthcare issue. So that's the big bucket that I think I'm most fired up to tackle when I'm in Washington.
So is it safe to say you're in favor of Medicare for all or some sort of public option? What are your thoughts?
I do support Medicare for all. And, I've supported it from the beginning of this campaign, but particularly now, when you look at over 40 million Americans who have filed for unemployment, and so many of them have lost their access to health insurance because we have a system that ties that to whether or not you are employed. It makes absolutely no sense at a moment in the midst of a global pandemic when we need people to be taking care of their public health. And, this is an issue that hits directly in our district. A month or two ago, unemployment in Fall River was at 24%. And I know it's fallen a bit since then, which is wonderful. But so many of those people are struggling to figure out how they access healthcare right now. And with a system like Medicare for All, we allow people to access care, can afford care, and can afford prescription drugs. I know that it will be a heavy lift, but I think it's what we have to do to keep people healthy in this country, to tackle economic inequality, and to create a more just 4th congressional district.
One of the issues that has cropped up over the past couple of months has been following the killing of George Floyd, has been the use of police force. Black Lives Matter movement has reinvigorated itself throughout this whole process. What are your thoughts about what we should be doing in terms of making sure our police forces represent all of us? And are you in favor of what is being called defunding the police?
Sure. Well, let me say loud and clear that Black Lives Matter, right? And that systemic racism has existed in this country 400 plus years, dating back to before our founding. And we need to say that out loud and acknowledge it if we're ever going to be able to do the work of rectifying that. Police brutality, murder at the hands of police is very real. We have known that for a long time, and because of technology have been able to see that now in stark relief on these incredibly upsetting videos. I've been out in the streets with so many people up and down the 4th congressional district, including in Fall River these past several months, and it has been incredibly powerful to see people come together and proclaim without reservation that Black Lives Matter. I was reading an article this morning, actually, that CNN had posted about Eugene, Oregon, where now almost 30 years ago, they had taken money that went to police departments and allowed police departments to respond to 911 calls related to suicide attempts or overdoses or mental health issues. And they took that money and they used it instead for mental health workers or doctors or social workers to show up and respond to those issues instead. Eugene's a community of a little over 170,000 people, so not quite twice the size of Fall River, and they've seen remarkable results. It's still a community that no doubt has work to do, but there is a time-tested method here in America that we've already seen working in a relatively large American city to take funds that had gone to police and put them into community services to make our cities safer. And the phrase defund the police means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But if you're talking about taking funding that had gone to police departments and using it for things like mental health services, for things like investing in education and housing, investing in healthcare, investing in mental health in particular, investing in parks and open space, so many of the components that contribute to larger social determinants of health that keep communities safe, yes, I absolutely support programs like that.
A lot of in the campaign, and this is our 3rd week we've been doing these interviews. We've spoken with 4 of your colleagues on the Democratic side thus far. A lot of the same themes have been coming forward in terms of taking care of those that are disadvantaged in our communities, and a lot of times that goes back to, in terms of people making a better life for themselves, have to circle around education. What are your plans in making sure that all of our citizens are able to get a quality education when they want it and when they need it?
Yeah, I actually just released a very comprehensive education plan a few weeks ago. So I'd like to break this down with early education and care, K through 12, and then higher education, because all of those components contribute to exactly what you just talked about, giving people access to opportunity. So short term, I think everyone knows if we don't solve our early education and care crisis, we are not reopening our economy, right? The economic crisis we're in right now has disproportionately impacted women, people who menstruate. We know that women still disproportionately bear the brunt of child caring responsibilities in families. And still, until we figure out how to provide federal funding for child care centers to open safely and provide enough seats for all of the kids who need them, we are not going to reopen our economy, and we need to make sure that there's federal funding to do that. Once we're past this crisis, we need to make sure that we have a long-standing system of early education and care that is affordable and accessible to everyone. And that includes paying the people who work in these jobs, largely women, largely immigrant women of color, a living wage. Right now, most of them in Massachusetts are being paid a wage that puts them at or below the poverty level. And I've been doing a lot of research into the incredible equitable model that the US military uses. And I think it's something that we should think about expanding nationwide. You know, when it comes to K through 12, I'm the former executive director of the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, the organization that works on standardized testing reform for public schools and college admissions. So I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about these issues. You know, we've been calling in my campaign for well over a month now for the bill that is sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk that would provide $3 trillion, $1 trillion of it earmarked for cities and towns to help bolster school budgets, to get that unstuck and off of his desk. You know, I was talking to Paul Hart, a school committee member in Fall River who happens to be supporting my campaign, about the needs of the Fall River School District. And we need federal stimulus money in the short term to make sure that not just Fall River, but all the school districts in the 4th Congressional District are able to open with the supports they need, funding for staff, funding for PPE and other public health measures. This is absolutely essential, not just in the short term of the next few weeks and months, but probably over the next few years. We need to bolster Title I federal money. Quite frankly, we need to pass the Fair Share Amendment here in Massachusetts, which is a state issue, not a federal one, but it would provide over $1 billion a year of revenue raised from the most fortunate among us on your million and first dollar and above, if you are so lucky as to make that million and first dollar, to be invested in education and transportation. I think we need to end the misuse of high-stakes standardized testing like the MCAS, and we need to make sure that we are supporting our teachers, paying them adequately, and particularly in these times, keeping them safe. And when we look at higher education, I am a big supporter of free 2- and 4-year public higher education. That includes community colleges and VOTEC. We have $1.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, dollars in student debt holding this country back. That was a major problem even before the economic crisis that we are in arrived, and it is only serving to slow us down even more. So we need to have debt relief. We need to make it easier to refinance debt, and we need better oversight of interest rates. And I know that was a long, long answer, but it is a complicated problem.
No, absolutely. You know, and another problem that appears to be very complicated is prior to COVID-19, the economy was doing very well. Unemployment rates were low, relatively so. And that, getting to my question here, you know, unemployment rates were low across the board. Although there was an issue of income inequality, and that's another big issue that's been brought up not only in this campaign, but in others across the country. How do you feel a way we could make that balance a little easier and a little more even between the haves and the have-nots, if you will, in our country?
Yeah, Keith, this one's pretty personal to me. I grew up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, 5,000 people, biggest town in the county, cows, corn, dairy, you name it. And opportunity left our town a long, long time ago. Not dissimilar to Fall River, we were, you know, fueled by a bunch of industries. For us, it was dairy and coal and paper for a while. You know, it wasn't textiles or jewelry up in Attleboro or something, but, you know, very similar construct. And a lot of industries left before I was even born, but when I was a kid in the early 80s, the paper plant at the end of Main Street that was keeping things going eventually shut down. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you what that meant for our little town, right? And no one paid attention moving forward about how we were going to access opportunity. And I know we felt incredibly left behind. And so when I look at communities, and I mean geographic communities and also broader communities of people who share that same feeling that my little town felt, I have a real personal fire in my belly for tackling those issues. And there are some things that I think we need to do at a very basic level to address that. You know, in the short term, a one-time $1,200 check just ain't gonna cut it, right? We need $2,000 a month for at least the next 4 months going to workers so people can survive. We need paid family and medical leave so that if you start a family, if you're caring for a loved one, or God forbid, you need to be cared for yourself, you can do it without risking financial ruin. We need to raise the minimum wage. We need to invest in transportation in communities that have been left behind. And let me be clear, I mean South Coast Rail. I know it's been promised for a long, long time. I was on the state's Regional Rail Advisory Committee that just a year or so ago recommended moving forward with South Coast Rail without delay and not in phases. That also means fully funding the regional transit authorities that exist in this district. 25% of their funding comes from the federal government. If you tackle the issues of transportation, you create opportunities for people to be upwardly mobile. We need to invest in affordable housing. We've already talked about education, and we've already talked about healthcare. You cannot tackle economic inequality if you aren't talking about the crisis of our failing healthcare system in this country. There are so many pieces of the puzzle, but Keith, here's the thing. We don't need any more studies. We don't need any more research papers. We know what we need to do. We just need to decide we have the political will to do it.
Yeah. How much does all this play into what the world is facing in terms of climate change? And I'll just ask you, are you in favor of the Green New Deal?
I absolutely support the Green New Deal, and this district stands to benefit so significantly from the economic growth and the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that could come from it. Obviously, offshore wind has the opportunity to provide huge amounts of jobs, both on the offshore wind sites, but also the transmission lines, the storage facilities, the work that will arise around that. I absolutely support making sure as many of those jobs as possible come with signed project labor agreements so that workers are protected and have advocates. But it's also about investing in transportation, right? If you try to do the Green New Deal and you don't invest in transit, you are doing it wrong. But here's the thing we need to think about in Massachusetts. We've actually already been the testing ground for the Green New Deal. You know, I served in the Patrick administration. Now, probably 12 plus years ago, Governor Patrick decided that he was going to start to invest in a clean energy industry here in Massachusetts with dollars and with the power of his bully pulpit. And almost out of thin air created what turned into the fastest growing industry in all of Massachusetts and created over 100,000 jobs. And by the way, reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, made us a healthier, safer state in the process. So it's the entire theory of change of the Green New Deal. We have already tried it and succeeded here in Massachusetts. And it's part of what makes me such a big supporter and part of what makes me so confident that it can make a healthier and more economically stable and equal 4th Congressional District.
You know, a lot of votes are normally gathered during the congressional races around these domestic issues. However, as one of 435 congressmen and women in Washington, foreign policy is also an issue. What are your thoughts in general in terms of our country's foreign policy, and how would you play a role in that?
Well, first, let's be clear that we have a lot of work to do to repair our standing on the global stage because of the incredible damage that this president has done to our reputation and causing harm around the world. So there will be a great deal of diplomacy that needs to be done to, again, repair that damage. I think it's incredibly important for Congress to play a role in foreign policy. We need to stop these endless wars. For one, it is bad for our standing in the world, and it takes money away from domestic programs that desperately, desperately need our attention. You know, we've articulated some of them here today. There's no question that the United States needs to continue to be a player on the global stage, and we need to invest particularly the diplomatic resources into our foreign policy work in order to do that. But I think before we can start making any forward progress, we have to work on undoing the harm that has come from this White House and the Trump administration.
As we move forward, I want to talk a little bit now about the campaigning itself for a few moments. How difficult has it been? You're a former political official in Brookline, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how difficult is it to run this untraditional, I guess, campaign where you're not able to meet people out at festivals? Summertime is a big opportunity, right? There's a lot of people at festivals and at other public events. How difficult is it to campaign differently this time around?
Keith, this was not the plan, right? I keep joking. I did not plan to run for the United States Congress from a couch, though I have relocated from my couch for you this afternoon. Listen, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard. You're right. I want to be at farmers markets and festivals and marching in parades and knocking on doors as opposed to trying to connect with voters, you know, from this green dot at the top of my computer. It's just not the same. But I am incredibly proud of my team and the creative ways that they have come up with to make sure that we're connecting with voters and with advocates, staying engaged in the community. You know, we've actually got a community conversation coming up on Facebook Live in Fall River with Paul Hart from the school committee and hopefully some other local leaders in the coming weeks. We've done similar events in Brookline, in Newton, in Taunton, in Milford, in Hopkinton just the other week. So again, it's not the same. It's not what I had hoped for in terms of being able to connect with folks one-on-one. And I'll tell you, one of the hardest pieces of it is that when you're in those rooms, you know, when I was at that MLK breakfast with you, people can come up to you and pull you aside and tell you a story, tell you about something that they're concerned about. You know, I still am really almost haunted by a mother who pulled me aside in Sharon several months ago now and told me about her son who had died of an opioid overdose. She found him in his bedroom, 19 years old. That doesn't happen on Zoom. People don't have the space to connect with you on that human level, to confide in you. And I fully understand that this is how we have to be campaigning. It's most important that we put public safety first and our campaign second, and we're doing that. But I would be lying if I said that we aren't missing something by campaigning like this.
The state legislature has passed a bill, I believe it's on the governor's desk, to make it easier for people to vote this fall, both in the primary and in the general election, more voting by mail. Are you in support of that? And is it something that maybe should last even past 2020?
Huge supporter, no question it needs to last. And quite frankly, I wish they had gone even farther. You know, I appreciate that the legislature was scrambling to make these changes very quickly, but I think as we look at expanding this, we need to look at what some other states do and automatically mail you your ballot, not just an application to receive your ballot, but boom, you get the ballot in your mailbox. Listen, I just said public health first, campaign second. That applies to voting too. So I'm very, very glad that we're going to expand opportunities for people to vote in Massachusetts. I think it is absolutely essential. You know, we had a municipal election in Brookline a few months ago. There was a vote by mail option ahead of time. It was really, really popular. I know other communities that have had municipal elections or special elections since the lockdown began have had similar experiences. So I'm excited that we're taking this step in Massachusetts. Obviously, I'm very anxious to see how it works out from a purely selfish standpoint over the next 8 weeks. But I hope that regardless, we see an expansion of voting rights and ease of people's ability to vote moving ahead from this election year.
You know, some people will say that equally as important as the domestic issues, which we've been talking about here for the last 20 or so minutes, is the partisanship that continues to override events and things getting done in Washington. As one of 435, how do you bridge that gap? How do you bring people together?
So about 2 years ago, I was on the 8-person team that the legislature here in Massachusetts asked to come to the table to negotiate a compromise around paid family and medical leave. I was running the Alliance for Business Leadership at the time, the business group I told you about earlier, and sitting on the same side of the table as social justice organizations, actually the Coalition for Social Justice from Fall River, and labor groups. And on the other side were more conservative business organizations. During the course of 7 months, we went from literally on day one, not agreeing on what the problem was that we were trying to solve, to after 7 months, and I can assure you, many, many cartons of munchkins and many, many boxes of Joe, we did the hard work of walking out of that room with a compromise that passed the House, the Senate, was signed by the governor. It's being implemented right now, and by the time it's fully implemented early next year, will be the strongest paid family medical leave law in the country. Now, I'm not fooling myself into thinking that compromise like that will happen every single time, but I know what it takes to work with people with whom I disagree. I know what it takes to work with people who may not even agree on what the problem is on the first day of negotiations, and to still walk out of that room with a nation-leading piece of legislation that tackles economic inequality and lifts up working families. But I do want to draw a little bit of a line in the sand here. You know, if we disagree based on policy, right? If you want South Coast Rail to happen, but you want to fund it with mechanism X, I want South Coast Rail to happen, but I want to fund it with mechanism Y, and let's get in that room with those boxes of Joe and the munchkins and do the work. If your difference, however, is somehow fueled by hate, right? The hate that this president has made okay for so many people. He didn't create it. It's been there the whole time, but he gave a lot of people permission. If it's fueled by racism or sexism or homophobia or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or ableism or anything like that, then I'm uninterested in inviting you to my table or coming to yours, because I don't want to validate that perspective in any way. And that's not necessarily a partisan issue. There are very much Republicans with whom I would be willing to work. But in this moment in time, I think it is important to draw that line in the sand. But I feel very good about my ability to work with people with whom I differ.
Well, I guess my follow-up question would be then, if there are more of that latter group of people, those that foster hate and won't even come to the table, how do you get things done?
Win elections.
Yeah. Very simple, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
Win elections. Elect people who aren't fueled by hate.
Yeah. Let me ask you, and I've asked this of all the other candidates thus far, the 9 of you running on the Democratic side reside in 3 communities: Newton, Brookline, and Wellesley, the northern part of the district. There may be some people in, the southern part of the district that may feel a little disconnected, where, many of you live in those wealthier suburbs of Boston. How do you try to relate and connect to the people in the other parts of the district? I'm sure you're going to split all those votes up in Brookline, Newton, and Wellesley.
My significant other and I went out for ice cream in Taunton yesterday, and we were driving through Taunton on the way to Tom and Jimmy's ice cream shop, where I highly recommend the Maine blueberry flavor. And I said, this is exactly like Honesdale, the little town I grew up in. I've made my home in Brookline as an adult these past 20 years, but I talked a little bit about where I'm from. It is so much more like Taunton and Attleboro and Fall River and the small communities in between than it is like where I happen to have made my home as an adult since I moved to Massachusetts in the late 90s. And, honestly, I didn't know until I moved to Massachusetts that you could meet your elected officials in person, other than, your borough council member or something like that. Mm-hmm. We were so far out of the way. We were not involved in the political process. And frankly, we had no money. I remember one time a congressional candidate who wound up losing coming to our county fair, and that was it. No one bothered. I could never look at myself in the mirror if I treated a community the way my community was treated. Never, ever, ever. I know exactly what it feels like to be from a place like where I grew up, a place like where I grabbed ice cream just yesterday. And I appreciate that I am going to have to prove that with deeds as opposed to with words on the campaign trail. But I can assure you that deep, deep, deep in my gut is my commitment to communities and people like where I grew up and the people I know and love who I grew up with. And I can assure you that that is a strong fire in my belly and something that I will carry with me always.
Finally, Jesse, as we wrap up, how can people find out more about your campaign?
Sure. Our website is just jessemermell.com. That's Jesse with an E, Mermell with 2 L's. You can see how to spell my name behind me. Find me on social media. If there are questions you have that we didn't cover today, send them my way. More than happy to answer any questions. And if you want to volunteer, if you want to get involved, we've got 8 weeks from tomorrow when voting takes place on September 1st. So really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I wish it could be in person, but glad that we could see each other at least over the screen.
Jesse Mermell, Democrat running for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. All the best in the campaign, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Take care.
I look forward to it. Stay safe.
All right. Again, I want to thank Jesse Mermell, candidate for the 4th Congressional District in Massachusetts, a Democrat. And we'll have more as we're talking with all the candidates running in this year's race. I'm Keith Tebow. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday. Check that Monday. And thanks for joining us. We'll talk again soon.